Hello and welcome to our Fireside Chronicle, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, we venture into the fog-laden streets of Victorian London and beyond, to unravel a tale of mystery and murder that drew even Sherlock Holmes into its shadowed web. Chapter 1: The Distressed Envoy. Hello, and welcome to our Fireside Chronicle, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. Tonight, we venture into the fog-laden streets of Victorian London and beyond, to unravel a tale of mystery and murder that drew even Sherlock Holmes into its shadowed web. It was a dreary evening in November 1887, the sort that cloaks London in a shroud of mist and melancholy, as if the city itself conspired to keep its secrets. The rain fell in a relentless drizzle, drumming against the windows of our modest lodgings at 221B Baker Street. Within, the fire crackled merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow across the room, where the detritus of Sherlock Holmes's peculiar habits mingled with my own attempts at order. His chemical apparatus cluttered one corner, vials and burners precariously balanced, while my medical journals lay stacked upon a side table, their pages dog-eared from frequent consultation. A faint haze of tobacco smoke lingered, for Holmes had been indulging in his pipe earlier, his mind adrift in that curious state of reverie that so often preceded his most brilliant deductions. Holmes himself lounged in his armchair, his lean frame draped in a crimson dressing gown, the firelight catching the sharp angles of his face. His long fingers coaxed a mournful tune from his Stradivarius, the notes weaving through the air like threads of thought, now plaintive, now piercing. I sat opposite, attempting to pen a few lines of my latest chronicle, though the somber melody and the pattering rain made concentration a challenge. "Holmes," I ventured at last, setting down my pen. "Must you play such a dirge? It's enough to make a man believe the world is ending." He paused, the bow hovering above the voice reached us, tinged with exasperation at being disturbed so late. Footsteps ascended the 17 steps to our sitting room, hesitant at first, then resolute, and a moment later the door swung open to reveal a figure who seemed to have stepped from the storm itself. Señor Eduardo Mendez, as he introduced himself, was a man of middle years, his dark hair streaked with silver and plastered wetly to his brow. His cloak, heavy with rain, dripped upon our rug, and his face was pale as moonlight, save for the feverish glint in his eyes. He wore the formal attire of a diplomat, black coat, silk cravat, and polished boots now dulled by mud. But his demeanor betrayed a man on the edge of despair. His hands trembled as he clutched a leather satchel, and his breath came in short, uneven gasps, as though he had run through the streets to reach us. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his voice thick with a Portuguese accent, yet polished by years of diplomatic service. "And Dr. Watson, I presume?" Holmes inclined his head, his expression one of keen interest. "You have the advantage of us, Señor Mendez. Pray take a seat by the fire and tell us what brings you to Baker Street on such a night." Mendez sank into the offered chair, his cloak shedding rivulets of water that pooled on the floor. He seemed to struggle for words, his gaze darting between us as if unsure whether to trust the sanctuary of our hearth. At last he drew a deep breath and began. "I am an envoy of the Portuguese crown, stationed in London these past 3 years," he said. I come on a matter of utmost urgency, one that threatens not only my nation's honor, but the delicate balance of alliances that hold Europe's peace. A countess lies dead in Lisbon, murdered in the sacred cloister of our cathedral. Her death is no mere tragedy. It is a spark that could ignite a conflagration. I beseech your aid, Mr. Holmes, for you alone are said to possess the mind capable of unraveling this calamity. Holmes's eyes narrowed, the firelight cast beneath his chin. A stab wound, yet no weapon, he murmured. A fan, a rosary, a note. Curious. And the cathedral. Describe it, Senor Mendez. Its layout, its accessibility, its visitors at such an hour. Mendez seemed taken aback by the specificity of the request, but he complied. The cathedral is ancient, its cloister a quadrangle of Gothic arches surrounding a garden of roses and cypresses. It is a place of solitude, accessible only through the sacristy or a side gate, which is locked at night. Few venture there after vespers, save the clergy or those seeking private prayer, as the Countess often did. She was known for her piety, retreating to the cloister to meditate. Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. And yet, someone knew her habits well enough to find her there, alone, in the dead of night. Tell me, Senor, who stood to gain from her death? Or perhaps, who feared her influence? Mendez's face darkened, and he lowered his voice to a near whisper. The Countess was a confidant to the court, privy to matters of state. There are those who resented her sway, nobles, merchants, even certain factions within the church. But to name them would be to court danger, for I am watched, Mr. Holmes. Even here in London I feel eyes upon me. Holmes's lips twitched in what might have been a smile. Then we shall be cautious, Senor, but thorough. You have my word. Watson, what say you to a journey to Lisbon? The fog of London grows tiresome, and I fancy the air of Portugal may clear our minds. I started, caught off guard by the sudden proposal. Lisbon? But Holmes, the case is barely begun. Precisely, he interrupted, rising with a fluid motion. The scene of the crime holds secrets that no envoy's tale can convey. We shall depart tomorrow, Senor Mendez, provided you can arrange passage. In the meantime, leave the satchel. I presume it contains papers relevant to the case. Mendez nodded. The rain continued its mournful song, and I knew, as I watched Holmes bend over the satchel, that we were embarking on a journey that would test even his formidable mind. Chapter 2. The Countess's Tale. The fire in our Baker Street sitting room burned low, its embers casting a ruddy glow across the papers strewn upon the table. Sherlock Holmes, his keen eyes alight with that peculiar intensity that heralded a case of singular interest, pored over the contents of Senor Mendez's satchel. The photograph of Countess Isabella de Almeida lay before us, her dark eyes gazing out with a serenity that belied her grim fate. I, Dr. John Watson, sat opposite, my notebook open, striving to capture the details of the envoy's tale, though my mind still reeled from the sudden prospect of a journey to Lisbon. Holmes, with a deft movement, unfolded a map of the cathedral precincts, his long fingers tracing the outlines of the cloister where the Countess had met her end. Watson, he said, without looking up, our visitor has painted a vivid picture, but it is incomplete. Let us hear the Countess's tale through Signor Mendez's words, and then we shall see what truths lie beneath the surface. I nodded, recalling the envoy's account with as much precision as my memory allowed. Signor Mendez was quite shaken, I began. He described the Countess as a woman of influence, widowed some years ago, and deeply entwined in the affairs of the Portuguese court. Her death, he said, was no ordinary murder, but a spark that could ignite political unrest. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. Indeed, Watson. A countess slain in a sacred cloister is no mere domestic tragedy. Pray, continue. What of the circumstances of her death? I consulted my notes, the envoy's trembling voice echoing in my mind. 2 nights ago, Countess Isabella de Almeida was found dead in the cloister of Lisbon's Cathedral, where she had gone for midnight prayer. A habit, Mendez said, born of her piety. She was discovered no names, saying only that her death threatened alliances between Portugal and her neighbors. He seemed fearful, Holmes, as if he suspected himself watched. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Fearful men are often the most revealing, Watson, for their caution betrays what they seek to conceal. The absence of a weapon is particularly suggestive. A murderer who removes the instrument of death is either methodical or panicked, and the state of the cloister will tell us which. The fan, too, intrigues me. Bloodied, you say, smeared, not splattered. I nodded. Mendez described it as smeared, as though the blood had been wiped upon it. Curious, Holmes murmured, rising to pace the room, his dressing gown swirling about him like a cloak. A fan is a delicate thing, Watson, not a weapon. Yet, its presence at the scene is no accident. And the rosary, broken, you say? Were the beads scattered haphazardly, or did they form a pattern? Mendez did not specify, I admitted. He said only that they were scattered, as if broken in a struggle. Holmes paused by the window, peering out into the fog-laden street. The gas lamps flickered, their light barely piercing the mist that clung to Baker Street like a living thing. A struggle. Yet, a single wound to the heart suggests precision, not chaos. The Countess was no frail creature, I wager, to be dispatched so neatly. And the note, what did Mendez make of it? He called it a mystery, I said, flipping through my notes. The paper bore writing, but in no language the authorities recognized. Mendez believed it might be a cipher, though he had not the skill to decipher it. He included it in the satchel along with a sketch of the cloister, and a letter from the Countess's steward, confirming her habit of midnight prayer. Holmes returned to the table, extracting the folded paper from the satchel. It was small, creased, and faintly stained, as though it had been clutched tightly before being concealed. He held it to the light, his cloister at midnight. Piety or secrecy? Her habits made her vulnerable, Watson, and someone exploited that vulnerability with ruthless precision. I shivered, though the fire still burned warmly. It's a grim business, Holmes. To strike down a woman in a place of sanctuary, it speaks of a cold heart. Or a desperate one, Holmes countered, his tone sharp. Murder is rarely an act of caprice, Watson. It is born of motive, greed, fear, revenge, or ambition. The Countess's position at court made her a target, but her death in the cloister suggests a personal betrayal. Someone knew her movements intimately. I glanced at the satchel, its contents now spread across the table like pieces of a puzzle. Mendez mentioned her wealth and influence. Could this be a matter of inheritance? A rival, perhaps, or a spurned suitor? Holmes chuckled softly. You are ever the romantic, Watson. Inheritance is plausible, but too pedestrian for a case of this complexity. The political undertones Mendez alluded to, alliances threatened, factions stirring, point to a deeper game. The Countess was no mere ornament at court. She was a player, and players attract enemies. He turned to the map, his finger tracing the cloister's quadrangle. The cloister is enclosed, accessible only through the sacristy or a side gate, locked at night. The killer entered and exited without detection, or they were already within. A priest, perhaps, or a trusted confidant. The absence of a weapon suggests they carried it away, which implies premeditation. Yet, the broken rosary hints at a struggle, or a deliberate act to mislead. I frowned, struggling to follow his rapid deductions. You think the scene was staged? Not staged, Watson, but curated, Holmes said, his eyes alight. The killer left clues, whether by design or oversight. The fan, the rosary, the note. They are signposts, if we can read them aright. But we must see the cloister ourselves, for no map or envoy's tale can capture the truth. Paused, his hand resting on the ciphered note. Mendez is a diplomat, Watson, trained to conceal as much as he reveals. His fear is genuine, but its source remains unclear. Is he afraid of the killer, or of what we might uncover? That too we shall discover in Lisbon. He extinguished the lamp, leaving only the fire to illuminate the room. Rest now, Watson, he said, his voice soft but resolute. The game is afoot, and it promises to be a formidable one. As I retired to my room, the echo of the cathedral bells from Mendez's tale lingered in my mind, tolling for a countess whose secrets had cost her life. I could only hope that Holmes's genius would pierce the fog of deceit that surrounded her death. Chapter 3. To Lisbon's Shores. The rain had ceased in London by the time we departed, but the memory of Senor Mendez's urgent visit lingered like a storm cloud over our journey. Sherlock Holmes, ever restless when a case gripped his mind, had spent the night poring over the contents of the envoy's satchel. The ciphered note, the map of Lisbon's cathedral, and the haunting photograph of Countess Isabella de Almeida. I, Dr. John Watson, had managed a few hours of uneasy sleep, my dreams troubled by visions of bloodied fans and broken rosaries. By dawn we were aboard a steamer bound for Lisbon, the promise of a complex mystery propelling us across the gray expanse of the sea. The ship, a sturdy vessel named Estrella do Mar, plowed through the waves with a steady rhythm, its engines humming beneath the deck. Holmes stood at the railing, his lean figure outlined against the mist, his eyes fixed on the horizon as though he could will Lisbon into view. His greatcoat, damp with sea spray, fluttered about him, and his pipe sent thin curls of smoke to mingle with the fog. I joined him, bracing myself against the chill, my thoughts still tangled in the details of the Countess's murder. "Holmes," I said, raising my voice over the wind, "you've been uncommonly silent since we left Baker Street. What occupies your mind?" He turned, his sharp features, gain or personal vendetta, remains to be seen. The journey passed in a blur of salt air and rolling waves, with Holmes pacing the deck or retreating to our cabin to study the ciphered note. I attempted to distract myself with a novel, but the image of the Countess's serene face, captured in that photograph, haunted me. Her death felt like a wound upon the world, and I sensed that Holmes, for all his detachment, felt the weight of it too. At last, on the third day, the coastline of Portugal emerged from the mist, its cliffs rising sharply against the sky. Lisbon greeted us with a tapestry of color and sound, tiled buildings in hues of azure and gold, the cries of fishmongers and street vendors, the clatter of hansom cabs and donkey carts. The air carried the scent of salt, orange blossoms, and something indefinable, a hint of mystery perhaps, that seemed to permeate the city's ancient stones. We disembarked at the bustling quay, where porters and sailors moved in a chaotic dance. Holmes, his eyes scanning the crowd, adjusted his scarf with a practiced motion. "Lisbon hides its secrets well, Watson," he remarked, stepping onto the cobbles. "But secrets, like footprints, have a way of betraying themselves to those who know where to look." Our lodgings, arranged by Mendez, were in a modest inn near the cathedral, its facade adorned with intricate azulejos that gleamed in the afternoon light. The innkeeper, a stout woman with a wary smile, welcomed us in halting English, her eyes darting to Holmes as if sensing his purpose. Our rooms were small but comfortable, with windows overlooking a narrow street where gas lamps flickered to life as dusk approached. The distant toll of cathedral bells echoed through the air, a solemn reminder of the task ahead. Holmes wasted no time. He spread the cathedral map across a table, its lines tracing the cloister's quadrangle and the surrounding precincts. "The cathedral is our first destination, Watson," he said, his voice low but resolute. "The cloister is the heart of this mystery, and I must see it before the trail grows colder." I glanced at the map, noting the cloister's isolation. "It's note. They are signposts, and we must follow them to their source." We ventured into the streets as evening fell, the fog settling over Lisbon like a velvet curtain. The city was a labyrinth of cobbled alleys and grand boulevards, its architecture a blend of Gothic spires and Baroque flourishes. Gas lamps cast pools of light, their flames wavering in the damp air, while the scent of roasting chestnuts mingled with the tang of the nearby Tagus River. The cathedral loomed ahead, its towers piercing the mist, a silent sentinel over the city's secrets. As we approached, the bells tolled again, their mournful notes reverberating through the stone. Holmes paused, his head tilted as if the sound itself carried meaning. "The Countess chose this place for her final prayer," he said softly. "Why? Solitude or something more?" The cathedral's facade was a masterpiece of carved stone, its arches and saints gazing down with solemn dignity. We entered through the main portal, where the air grew cool and heavy with the scent of incense. The nave stretched before us, vast and dimly lit, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow. A few worshippers knelt in prayer, their whispers mingling with the faint echo of an organ. Holmes's eyes darted about, taking in every detail. The worn pews, the flickering votive candles, the side chapels draped in velvet. "The cloister lies through the sacristy," he said, striding toward a heavy oak door. "Come, Watson. Let us see where the Countess met her fate." The sacristy was a small, cluttered room, its walls lined with vestments and sacred vessels. A young priest, startled by our arrival, rose from a desk strewn with papers. "Señores," he said, his English halting, "the cloister is closed to visitors at this hour." Holmes produced a letter from Mendez, its seal bearing the Portuguese crown. "We are here on official business," he said, his tone brooking no argument. "The matter concerns the Countess de Almeida, You will allow us access." The priest hesitated, then nodded, leading us to gaze fixed on the arches. "Tomorrow we shall examine the scene in daylight, but already I sense the threads of this mystery converging. The cloister holds the truth, Watson, and we shall uncover it." As we returned to the inn, the fog thickened, wrapping Lisbon in a shroud of mystery. I felt the weight of the Countess's death, her presence lingering in the city's ancient stones. Holmes, however, walked with the confidence of a man who saw not shadows, but light. Chapter 4. The Cloister's Secrets. The dawn broke over Lisbon with a gentle radiance, its light piercing the fog that had cloaked the city the previous night. The cathedral spire stood tall against a sky streaked with pink and gold, their solemn presence a stark contrast to the grim task that lay before us. Sherlock Holmes and I had risen early, driven by his unyielding determination to examine the cloister where Countess Isabella de Almeida had met her untimely end. As we stepped from our inn into the cool morning air, the city was just stirring, its streets alive with the clatter of carts and the cries of vendors. Yet my thoughts were fixed on the cloister, a place of sanctity now marred by murder. Holmes, clad in his greatcoat and carrying his ever-present satchel, strode ahead with the purpose of a man on the scent. "The morning light, Watson," he remarked, his voice crisp, "reveals what moonlight conceals. The cloister will speak to us, if we listen." We reached the cathedral as the bells tolled 6, their deep notes reverberating through the stone. The young priest from the previous evening, still wary, admitted us to the cloister with a nod, though his eyes lingered on Holmes as if sensing the weight of his scrutiny. The courtyard opened before us, a quadrangle of Gothic arches surrounding a garden of roses and cypresses, their shadows long and sharp in the dawn's glow. The air was heavy with the scent of damp stone and blooming flowers, and a small fountain at the center trickled softly, its sound a quiet counterpoint to the gravity of our purpose. Holmes paused at arches carved with intricate tracery, the roses blooming in defiant splendor despite the autumn chill. Yet the scene was haunted by the Countess's fate, and I could almost see her silhouette, elegant in her velvet gown, collapsing in a pool of crimson. Holmes's attention fixed on a spot near the stain, where a single rosary bead glinted in the light. He retrieved it with care, holding it up to his magnifying glass. "Ebony, finely carved," he murmured. "Yet this bead is unlike the others Mendez described. The rosary was broken, you say? Scattered as if in a struggle?" I nodded, recalling the envoy's account. He said the beads were strewn about, as though torn apart. "Do you think the killer broke it deliberately?" Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Perhaps, Watson. Or perhaps the Countess herself clutched it in her final moments, breaking it in her grasp. Observe the bead's edge, worn, as if handled often. This was no mere ornament. It held significance." He pocketed the bead and turned his attention to the bloodied fan, which Mendez had described as lying beside the Countess. The authorities had preserved it, and the priest produced it from a locked box in the sacristy. The fan was exquisite, its ivory handle intricately carved, though now marred by smears of dried blood. Holmes examined it closely, noting a faint monogram etched into the handle. J.V. "J.V.," he said softly, his eyes narrowing. "A clue, Watson. But to whom?" A lover, a rival, or a misdirection? The blood is smeared, not splattered, suggesting it was wiped upon the fan after the deed. The killer left it here deliberately, perhaps to point us elsewhere. I frowned, struggling to follow his reasoning. But why leave the fan at all? If they took the weapon, why not take this too? Holmes's gaze returned to the flagstones. Because, Watson, the fan is a message, or a taunt. The killer wished it to be found, to draw our eye. Yet it is the rosary and the note that intrigue. The killer either had a key or entered through the sacristy. The priest we met, he was here the night of the murder? Yes, I said, recalling the young man's nervous demeanor. He admitted us last night, and he seemed uneasy. Do you suspect him? Holmes's eyes gleamed. I suspect everyone, Watson, until the facts absolve them. The priest's access to the cloister makes him a candidate, but his nervousness may be mere coincidence. We shall question him further. As he spoke, a faint breeze stirred the roses, sending a petal drifting to the flagstones. Holmes paused, his attention caught by a small irregularity near the fountain, a scuff mark, barely visible in the dust. He crouched, his fingers brushing the stone. A boot, Watson, size 9, with a distinctive heel. Not the Countess's nor the priest's, whose shoes I observed last night. A third party was here, and recently. I felt a chill, though the morning was warming. The killer, then? Possibly, Holmes said, rising. Or a witness, or someone tidying the scene. The mark is fresh, made after the rain 2 nights ago. We are not alone in our interest in this cloister. He continued his examination, noting the angles of the arches, the sightlines from the sacristy, and the position of the garden's cypresses. The Countess was stabbed here, he said, pointing to the blood-stained flagstones, facing the garden. Her killer stood close, intimately close, Watson. This was no stranger's work. The precision of the wound, the absence of a struggle beyond the broken rosary suggests trust, or at least familiarity. I glanced at the arches, their shadows now softening as the sun climbed higher. But how could they escape unnoticed? The sacristy is guarded, and the gate was locked. Holmes's smile was enigmatic. That, Watson, is the heart of the puzzle. The cloister is a fortress, yet the killer breached it. We must consider all possibilities, a hidden passage, a bribed guard, or a cloister's peace. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his eyes alight with the thrill of the chase. This is no ordinary murder, Watson, he said as we hailed a cab. The cloister's secrets are many, but they will not elude us for long. Prepare yourself for a long day, for the game is well and truly afoot. Chapter 5. Suspects and Shadows. The morning light that had illuminated the cloister's secrets now faded into the cool shadows of the cathedral's sacristy, where Sherlock Holmes and I prepared to confront the first threads of human evidence in the murder of Countess Isabella de Almeida. The cloister had yielded its cryptic clues: a bloodied fan, a broken rosary, a ciphered note, and a telltale scuff mark. But it was the living, not the dead, who now held the key to unraveling this mystery. Holmes, his mind a whirl of calculations, had insisted on interviewing those closest to the Countess's final moments. And so, we found ourselves in the sacristy, a room steeped in the solemnity of sacred duty, yet now tainted by suspicion. The sacristy was a narrow chamber, its walls adorned with velvet drapes and shelves of sacred vessels, their silver surfaces gleaming faintly in the candlelight. A heavy oak table dominated the center, its surface scarred by years of use, and around it sat 3 figures, each a potential link to the Countess's fate. Holmes stood at the head of the table, his lean frame commanding the room, his eyes sharp as they assessed the trio before us. I stood to his side, my notebook open, ready to record every word, gesture, and hesitation that might betray a guilty heart. The first was Father Lorenzo, the young priest who had admitted us to the cloister the previous night. His boyish face, framed by a shock of dark hair, was pale, and his hands fidgeted with a small crucifix hanging from his neck. Beside him sat Señor Raúl Villegas, the Countess's suitor, a man in his early 30s with a handsome, brooding countenance. His dark eyes were red-rimmed, as though he had wept. Yet there was a hardness in his jaw that suggested more than grief. The third figure was absent, a cloaked stranger reportedly seen lurking near the cloister on the night of the murder, now vanished into Lisbon's labyrinthine streets. His absence hung over the room like a specter, a shadow without a name. Holmes began, his voice calm. "Father, and the sacristy, which leads to the cloister, is under your charge. Did no one pass through, clergy, servants, or otherwise?" Father Lorenzo's face flushed and he shook his head. "No one, Señor. The sacristy was locked, as is custom after Vespers. The side gate to the cloister is also secured. I swear I saw no one." Holmes leaned forward, his voice low and deliberate. "Yet a killer entered and exited, Father, leaving a woman dead. The gate was locked, you say, but locks can be opened. By key, by force, or by complicity. Your hands tremble, sir. Is it guilt or merely fear?" The priest's eyes widened, and he clasped his hands tightly together. "Fear, Señor Holmes. Fear for my flock, for the sanctity of this place. I am no murderer. I serve the Countess as her confessor, nothing more." Holmes's lips twitched, but he turned his attention to Raúl Villegas, whose grief seemed to war with defiance. "Señor Villegas," Holmes said, "you were the Countess's suitor, were you not? A man close to her heart, and perhaps her secrets. Where were you when she died?" Villegas straightened, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I was at my home, Señor Holmes, alone. Isabella, Countess de Almeida, had refused to see me that evening, saying she needed solitude for prayer. I respected her wishes, though it pained me. When I learned of her death, His voice broke, and he looked away, his hands clenching into fists. Holmes's gaze was unrelenting. A suitor scorned, perhaps, or one who knew her habits well enough to find her in the cloister, alone. The fan found beside her bore the initials J.V. Curiously close to your own, Señor. Villegas's head snapped up, his eyes flashing. Those are not mine. I loved Isabella. She was to be my wife, had she not been taken from me. I would never harm her. A secret that might explain her death. The priest hesitated, his fingers tracing the crucifix. The seal of confession is sacred, Señor Holmes. I cannot divulge what she told me, but I will say she was troubled in her final days. speaking of burdens she could not share, even with me. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Burdens, you say? Political, personal, or otherwise? A woman of her influence would have many enemies. Father Lorenzo shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. I cannot say. She was devout, but guarded. Her prayers were fervent, as if seeking protection. Holmes paced slowly, his hands clasped behind his back. Protection from whom, Father? The cloaked stranger, perhaps? Or someone closer, someone within these walls? The priest's face paled further, and he looked away, his silence louder than words. Holmes paused, his gaze lingering on the cleric's trembling hands. Watson, he said softly, observe how the good father's fingers betray him. Guilt, fear, or both. I nodded, my pen scratching furiously in my notebook. The sacristy felt oppressive now, the candlelight casting distorted shadows that seemed to dance with secrets. Villegas, too, was restless, his eyes darting between Holmes and the priest, as if seeking an ally or an enemy. Holmes turned to the table, where the bloodied fan and a sketch of the broken rosary lay, provided by the authorities at his request. These items, he said, addressing both men, were found beside the Countess. The fan, marked J.V., suggests a connection, perhaps to you, Senor Villegas, or another. The rosary, broken, hints at a struggle, or a deliberate act to mislead. And the ciphered note, hidden in her sleeve, speaks of a secret she died to protect. What can you tell me of these? Villegas shook his head, his voice hoarse. I know nothing of the fan or the note. The rosary, she always carried it, a gift from her late husband. It was precious. The stranger remained a phantom, his role unclear. We left the sacristy as the bells tolled noon, the sound echoing through the cathedral's stone. Holmes was silent, his mind no doubt weaving the threads of testimony and clue into a coherent pattern. They are hiding something, Watson, he said at last, as we stepped into the bustling streets. The priest's fear, the suitor's anger, each is a piece of the puzzle. But it is the stranger who intrigues me most. A shadow that leaves no trace is a shadow worth pursuing. The fog had lifted, but the mystery of the Countess's death hung heavier than ever, its secrets buried deep within the cathedral's ancient walls. Chapter 6. The Red Herring. The investigation into the murder of Countess Isabella de Almeida had drawn Sherlock Holmes and me deeper into Lisbon's shadowed underbelly, where the cathedral's sanctity gave way to the city's grime and secrets. The cloister had revealed its cryptic clues. A bloodied fan, a broken rosary, a ciphered note, and a scuff mark. But the interviews with Father Lorenzo and Senor Raúl Villegas had only thickened the fog of suspicion. Holmes, ever relentless, had caught wind of a new lead from a cathedral servant, a smuggler named Diego, rumored to traffic relics through the cathedral's precincts, had been seen near the cloister on the night of the murder. This thread, tenuous though it was, led us to the docks, where the air was thick with the tang of salt and tar, and the city's pulse beat loudest. The tavern, known as a Serea Dorada, crouched at the edge of the quay, its windows clouded with grime and its sign creaking in the evening breeze. As we entered, the din of conversation faltered, eyes turning to us, two strangers in great coats, out of place among the rough crowd. The air was heavy with tobacco smoke and the sour reek of spilled wine, and the lanterns cast a sickly glow over faces weathered by sea and sin. Holmes, undeterred, scanned the room with his hawk-like gaze, his presence commanding silence as he moved toward a corner table where a burly man sat alone. Knife, stained with blood, was found in your lodgings this morning. Care to explain? Diego's hand tightened on his glass, but his expression remained impassive. I don't know what you're talking about, senor. I'm a trader, not a killer. I was at the docks that night, loading cargo. Ask any man here, they'll vouch for me. Holmes's smile was thin, his voice deceptively mild. A trader in relics, perhaps. The cathedral is known to house treasures, some of which find their way to less sacred hands. The Countess, I understand, was vigilant about such thefts. Did she cross your path, Diego? Did she threaten your trade? The smuggler's eyes narrowed, and he leaned back, his chair creaking under his weight. You've got nerve coming here with accusations. I never met the Countess, and I don't deal in church trinkets. As for the knife, it's not mine. Someone's trying to pin this on me, and I don't take kindly to it. Holmes produced a folded cloth from his satchel, unwrapping it to reveal a dagger, its blade crusted with dried blood. The tavern's din faded as eyes turned to the weapon, its steel glinting in the lantern light. This was found hidden in your room, Diego, Holmes said, his tone unrelenting. The blood matches the Countess's wound, or so the authorities believe. Your alibi is flimsy, and your reputation precedes you. Speak plainly, or the Lisbon police will have more than words to extract from you. Diego's face darkened, and he slammed his glass on the table, spilling liquor across the scarred wood. That knife's a plant, I tell you. I was at the docks, working with my crew. I've got witnesses. João, Miguel, half a dozen others. Someone's framing me, and I'd wager it's that priest or the fancy suitor sniffing around the Countess. They've got more to hide than I do. Holmes's eyes gleamed, his fingers steepled as he leaned closer. A convenient defense, Diego. But let us test it. Your crew. Where are they now? Diego gestured toward a group of sailors at a nearby table, their faces wary as they watched the exchange. Holmes rose, approaching the men with the confidence of a knife, however, is troubling. If not yours, who placed it in your lodgings? Diego's scar twitched as he scowled. I don't know, but I've enemies enough. Smugglers, rivals, even the church, they'd all love to see me swing. Check the priest's hands, senor. They're not as clean as his robes. Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. An interesting suggestion. But tell me, Diego, have you heard of a cloaked figure near the cathedral that night? A man, perhaps, who moves like a shadow? Diego's eyes flickered, a hint of unease breaking through his bravado. Whispers, nothing more. Some say a stranger was seen by the cloister gate, but I didn't see him. Ask the street rats. They see everything. Holmes nodded, rising with a fluid motion. We shall, Diego. For now, remain in Lisbon. The truth has a way of surfacing, and I intend to drag it into the light. As we left the tavern, the night air was cool, the docks alive with the creak of ships and the shouts of laborers. I glanced at Holmes, whose face was set in thought. Do you believe him, Holmes? The knife is damning, yet his alibi holds, if his crew can be trusted. Holmes's eyes glinted in the lantern light. The knife, Watson, is too convenient. Its discovery in Diego's lodgings, just as we pursue the case, reeks of misdirection. The blood may match the Countess's wound, but its placement suggests a hand other than Diego's. A smuggler would be careless to leave such evidence, and Diego, for all his roughness, is no fool. I frowned, my mind grappling with the implications. Then who planted it? Father Lorenzo? Villegas? or this cloaked stranger? Holmes's pace quickened, his greatcoat swirling as we navigated the narrow streets back toward the cathedral. All are possible, Watson, but the stranger intrigues me most. A figure seen, yet unseen, leaving no trace but rumors. The knife is a red herring, meant to divert us from the true path. The Countess's killer is subtler, their motive woven into the clues we found in the cloister, the fan, the rosary, the note. I clutched the city's secrets whispering in the shadows, as Holmes led the way back to the heart of the mystery, undeterred by the red herring that had briefly clouded our path. Chapter 7. The Cipher Unraveled. The investigation into the murder of Countess Isabella de Almeida had drawn Sherlock Holmes and me into a web of deception, where every clue seemed to lead to another shadow. The cloister's cryptic relics, a bloodied fan, a broken rosary, a ciphered note, and a scuff mark, had pointed us to suspects and false leads alike. The smuggler Diego's knife, a red herring planted to mislead, had only sharpened Holmes's resolve. Now, back in the quiet of our Lisbon inn, he turned his formidable intellect to the ciphered note found in the Countess's sleeve, a scrap of paper that held the promise of unlocking the mystery's heart. The inn's small room was a haven of warmth against the chill of the Lisbon night, its single candle casting a golden glow over the desk where Holmes worked. Papers littered the surface: the cathedral map, sketches of the cloister, and notes on our interviews with Father Lorenzo, Raúl Villegas, and the elusive cloaked stranger who remained a phantom. The ciphered note lay at the center, its strange symbols taunting us with their opacity. I, Dr. John Watson, sat nearby, my notebook open, recording every detail of Holmes's process, though I confess I struggled to follow the labyrinth of his thoughts. "Holmes," I said, breaking the silence, "you've been at that note for hours. Can it truly hold the key to the Countess's death?" He glanced up, his eyes alight with the fervor of discovery. "It is the key, Watson, or at least a door to it. The Countess concealed this note in her sleeve, a deliberate act of secrecy. Its symbols are no random scribble but a code, and codes are made to be broken." He held the note to the candlelight, its creased surface revealing a series of characters, curved lines, dots, and angular marks that bore no resemblance to any alphabet I knew. "This is not a standard diplomatic cipher," he murmured, his pencil tracing the symbols. "Nor is it a simple counting letters," I ventured. "Symbols, Watson," he corrected, not looking up. "Each represents a letter, a word, or perhaps a concept. The key is to find the pattern. The Countess was a woman of influence, privy to court secrets. This note likely pertains to those secrets, and her death was meant to silence them." The candle flickered, casting shadows that danced across the tapestries. Outside, the fog pressed against the window, muffling the sounds of Lisbon's streets. The distant toll of a church bell marked midnight, its mournful note a reminder of the Countess's final hour in the cloister. Holmes worked on, his focus unbroken, until at last he paused, his pencil hovering over a completed chart. "A Polybius square," he said, his voice tinged with satisfaction. "A classic cipher, but modified. The symbols correspond to a grid with coordinates for each letter. The Countess, or her correspondent, used a keyword to shift the grid, making it resistant to simple decoding." I frowned, struggling to follow. "A keyword? How do you find it?" Holmes's eyes gleamed. "By deduction, Watson. The Countess was Portuguese, devout, and connected to the court. The key word must be something personal yet significant. Her late husband's name, perhaps, or a term tied to her faith. He scribbled again, testing combinations, his brow furrowed in concentration. I sat back, my mind drifting to the cloister, the bloodied fan, the broken rosary, the scuff mark of a stranger's boot. Each clue seemed to point in a different direction, yet Holmes saw them as threads in a single tapestry. The smuggler Diego's knife had been a distraction, but this note, hidden so carefully, felt like the true heart of the case. At last Holmes let out a low exclamation, his pencil halting. "Valenza," he said, his voice sharp with triumph. "The Countess's title. The keyword is Valenza. Watch, Watson." He drew a 5x5 grid, filling it with the alphabet, adjusted for the Portuguese language, and a plot is another possibility. A secret society, perhaps, or a court faction using JV as a code. I frowned, recalling our interviews. Father Lorenzo spoke of her being troubled. Could she have uncovered a plot, something tied to the court? Holmes nodded, his fingers drumming on the desk. "Precisely, Watson. The Countess was no mere noblewoman. She was a confidant to the crown, privy to secrets that could destabilize alliances. This note suggests she discovered something dangerous, a conspiracy, perhaps, within the court or the church. Her death was a silencing, not a crime of passion." He rose, pacing the small room, his shadow long and sharp in the candlelight. "The cipher points to a meeting. But the cloister's isolation suggests the killer knew her plans. The broken rosary, the bloodied fan, these were left to mislead, to make the murder appear personal or random. But the note, hidden in her sleeve, was meant to remain secret. Its discovery was the killer's oversight." I shivered, the weight of the revelation settling over me. Then the killer is someone close to her, someone she trusted enough to meet alone. Holmes's eyes glinted. Or someone she feared enough to confront. The scuff mark in the cloister, the cloaked stranger. These are pieces yet to fit. But the note narrows our focus. JV is either the killer or a witness, and we must find them. He returned to the desk, gathering the papers with a decisive motion. "Tomorrow, Watson, we return to the cathedral. The priest in Viegas must be questioned again, and we must seek this cloaked figure. The streets of Lisbon hold whispers of their presence, and whispers can lead to truth." I glanced at the window, where the fog pressed closer, muffling the city's heartbeat. "Holmes, do you think Senor Mendez knew of this note's contents?" His fear seemed more than diplomatic concern. Holmes's smile was enigmatic. "Mendez is a man of secrets, Watson, and his role in this affair is unclear. He brought us the case, Murder of Isabella de Almeida, revealing a midnight rendezvous with the mysterious JV in the cloister where she met her end. The bloodied fan, the broken rosary, and the scuff mark in the cloister had pointed to a calculated betrayal. But the identity of the killer remained elusive. Sherlock Holmes, invigorated by the cipher's revelation, was now consumed with tracking the cloaked stranger rumored to have been seen near the cathedral on the night of the murder. The smuggler Diego's planted knife had been a distraction, but the whispers of this shadowy figure, combined with the note's summons, suggested a deeper conspiracy. As night fell over Lisbon, Holmes's pursuit of the truth led us into the city's underbelly, where secrets moved as swiftly as shadows. Our inn, with its candlelit warmth, felt a world away as we ventured into the fog-drenched streets. The air was thick with the scent of salt from the nearby Tagus River, mingled with the faint perfume of orange blossoms and the acrid tang of coal smoke. Holmes, his greatcoat buttoned against the chill, moved with the purpose of a hound on the scent, his eyes scanning the alleys for any sign of the cloaked figure. I followed, my revolver a reassuring weight in my pocket, though the oppressive fog and the labyrinthine streets made me uneasy. "Holmes," I said, my voice low as we paused at a corner. "How do you propose to find this stranger? The city is vast, and the rumors are vague at best." He glanced at me, his eyes glinting in the dim light of a gas lamp. "Rumors, Watson, are the breadcrumbs of truth. The cathedral servants spoke of a cloaked figure near the cloister gate, and Diego mentioned street informants who see all. We shall follow the whispers to their source." Our destination was a meeting place known to Lisbon's less savory elements, a shadowed courtyard near the docks where information was traded as freely as coin. Holmes had learned of it from a street urchin, whose sharp eyes and quick tongue had been bought with a few escudos. The courtyard lay at the end of a narrow alley. Brought us this case. "Holmes," I whispered, gripping his arm. "Mendez, what is he doing here?" Holmes's eyes narrowed, his voice a mere breath. "Conspiring, Watson, or spying. Stay close." We edged closer, concealed by a stack of crates, and caught fragments of their conversation. Viegas's voice was sharp, accusing. "You promised discretion, Mendez. If the court learns of this, we're finished." Mendez's reply was calm but edged with fear. "I've kept my word, Viegas. But the detective, he's too close. The note was never meant to be found." The cloaked figure spoke, their voice low and indistinct, muffled by the hood. The Countess knew too much. Her death was necessary. But Holmes, he must be stopped. My blood ran cold, and I glanced at Holmes, whose expression was one of intense concentration. Before I could speak, the cloaked figure turned, their eyes catching the faint light as they scanned the courtyard. Holmes acted swiftly, stepping into the open, his voice ringing out. "Gentlemen," he said, his tone deceptively mild, "your meeting is ill-timed. I am Sherlock Holmes, and I would have words with you." The effect was electric. Viegas swore, his hand reaching for something beneath his coat, while Mendez froze, his face pale as moonlight. The cloaked figure, however, moved with startling speed, bolting toward the alley's far end. Holmes was after them in an instant, his greatcoat flaring as he vaulted over a crate, shouting, "Watson, with me!" I followed, my boots slipping on the wet cobbles as we plunged into the maze of alleys. The cloaked figure was a shadow ahead, weaving through the fog with the agility of one who knew the city's secrets. The chase was relentless, the air filled with the sound of our footsteps, the crash of overturned crates, and the occasional shout from startled passers-by. Gas lamps flickered, their light barely penetrating the mist, and the cathedral's bells tolled faintly, marking the hour as we pursued our quarry. Holmes was relentless, his long strides eating up the distance, his eyes fixed on "Who are you, and what is your role in the Countess's death?" The man spat, his eyes blazing with defiance. "You get nothing from me, detective. You're meddling in affairs beyond your ken." Holmes's smile was cold. "We shall see. Watson, bind his hands." I produced a length of cord from my pocket, securing the man's wrists as he glared at us. Mendez and Villegas arrived moments later, breathless and disheveled, their faces a mix of fear and anger. Holmes turned to them, his gaze piercing. "Senor Mendez," he said, "your presence here is most enlightening. You brought this case to me, yet you consort with conspirators in the dead of night. Explain yourself." Mendez's hands trembled, his diplomatic composure fraying. I had no choice, Mr. Holmes. I was spying, gathering information for the crown. The Countess uncovered a plot, a secret society within the court, plotting against the monarchy. I sought to learn more to protect Portugal. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And did this society include the Countess's killer? Speak plainly, Mendez, or your silence will condemn you. Mendez swallowed, his voice hoarse. I don't know the killer's name, but the Countess suspected Villegas. The note, the initials JV, she believed he was involved. I followed him here to confirm it. Villegas's face contorted with rage. Lies. I loved Isabella. I would never harm her. This man, he gestured to the cloaked figure. He's the one you want. He spoke of silencing her, of protecting the society's plans. The cloaked man laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. You're all fools, squabbling like children. The Countess was a threat, and threats are eliminated. You'll find no proof against me. Holmes's expression was unyielding. Proof, sir, is my trade. You will come with us, and the Lisbon authorities will have their say. We escorted the trio back to the inn, the cloaked man bound and sullen, Mendez and Villegas trailing behind under Holmes's watchful eye. The fog seemed to thicken, wrapping the city in a shroud of secrecy, mysteries surrounding Countess Isabella de Almeida's murder. Yet the truth remained just beyond our grasp. The ciphered note, decoded to reveal a midnight meeting with JV, had pointed to a conspiracy within the Portuguese court, confirmed by Senor Mendez's reluctant admission of a secret society. The cloaked stranger, apprehended in the nighttime pursuit, had hinted at a larger plot, but denied direct involvement in the killing. Raúl Villegas's passionate denials and Father Lorenzo's nervous silences only deepened the web of suspicion. Now, as dawn broke over Lisbon, Sherlock Holmes insisted we return to the cloister, convinced that a final clue lay hidden in the scene of the crime. The cathedral stood serene in the early light, its spires piercing a sky streaked with gold and amber. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of dew-soaked roses and the faint tang of the Tagus River. Holmes, his greatcoat damp from the morning mist, led the way through the cathedral's nave, where a few worshippers knelt in silent prayer, their murmurs blending with the distant hum of an organ. The young priest, Father Lorenzo, was nowhere to be seen, a fact that did not escape Holmes's notice as we passed through the sacristy to the cloister. The courtyard was a vision of tranquility, its Gothic arches framing a garden where cypresses stood like silent sentinels. The flagstones, still bearing the faint stain of the Countess's blood, gleamed under a thin layer of dew. Holmes paused at the center, his eyes sweeping the scene with the intensity of a man who saw not just stone and flora, but a narrative written in their arrangement. "Watson," he said, his voice low but vibrant with purpose. "The cloister has spoken to us before. The fan, the rosary, the note, the scuff mark. But we have overlooked something. The truth lies in the details, and I sense we are close to its revelation." I followed, my notebook ready, though I confess I felt a pang of frustration. "Holmes, we've combed this place already. The fan's initials, the note's cipher, the smuggler's knife, the note, hidden in her sleeve. Each item was placed, Watson, but the rosary intrigues me most. He moved to the garden where a single ebony bead still lay, missed by the authorities in their hasty cleanup. He retrieved it with care, holding it to the light. "This bead," he said, "is unlike the others. Its carving is finer, its weight heavier. Observe the faint inscription, a cross barely visible, etched into the surface." I peered at the bead, squinting to make out the tiny mark. A cross? But rosaries often bear such symbols. How is this significant? Holmes's eyes gleamed. "It is significant, Watson, because it matches a gift the Countess gave to someone she trusted. A token of faith, or perhaps loyalty. I recall Father Lorenzo's crucifix worn around his neck during our interview. Its design was distinctive, with a similar cross. This bead was no accident. It links the rosary to the priest." I felt a chill, despite the warming morning. "You suspect Father Lorenzo?" His fear was palpable, but murder, Holmes. He was her confessor, a man of the cloth. Holmes rose, pocketing the bead. Men of the cloth are men still, Watson, capable of fear, greed, or betrayal. The Countess's note summoned J.V. to the cloister. But the priest had access, opportunity, and, perhaps, motive. His alibi, tending candles at midnight, was flimsy, and his hands trembled when we questioned him. Let us test this clue further. We moved to the sacristy where Holmes examined the priest's desk, its surface cluttered with papers and a small box of sacramental items. Among them was a rosary, its beads matching those found in the cloister, save for one, the ebony bead with the etched cross. Holmes's fingers lingered on it, his expression one of quiet triumph. "This rosary," he said, "was the Countess's, given to Father Lorenzo as a token of trust. Its presence in the cloister, broken, fanned to mislead." I nodded, the pieces falling into place, though doubts lingered. "And the cloaked stranger? Mendez's meeting with him and Villegas. Does that not suggest a larger plot?" Holmes's smile was grim. "The stranger is a conspirator, Watson, but not the killer. His role was to distract, to draw attention from the true culprit. Mendez's presence at that meeting suggests he was either complicit or spying, as he claimed. But the priest's access to the cloister, his knowledge of the Countess's habits, and this bead make him the linchpin." We returned to the cloister, Holmes retracing the Countess's final steps with meticulous care. He paused at the side gate, its lock still intact, and examined the ground nearby. "The scuff mark," he said, pointing to the faint trace of a boot. "It matches the priest's shoes, Watson, not in size, but in wear. I observed his boots during our interview. They bore a distinctive heel, worn at the edge. He was here, not tending candles, but meeting the Countess." The realization hit me like a blow. Then Father Lorenzo killed her to protect the society's secrets? Holmes nodded, his voice low. The Countess confronted him, perhaps suspecting his involvement. She trusted him, Watson, and that trust was her undoing. The bead left behind was his mistake, a small detail, but enough to betray him. As the sun climbed higher, the cloister seemed to shed its shadows, the roses glowing in the light. Yet the weight of the Countess's death lingered, her final moments etched into the stone. Holmes stood silent, his gaze distant, as if seeing the scene unfold. The Countess, fervent in prayer, approached by a trusted friend who struck with cold precision. "We must confront Father Lorenzo," I said, my voice firm. "His alibi will crumble under this evidence." Holmes's eyes met mine, their intensity unwavering. "We shall, Watson, but with care. That the priest is a small piece of a larger game. The society, the cloaked stranger, Mendez's role, these threads remain untied. Society, and the final clue, a single ebony rosary bead, had pointed to Father Lorenzo as the killer. Now, with Mendez summoned to our lodgings, Holmes prepared to lay bare the truth, his mind a beacon piercing the shadows of the case. The sitting room was warm, the fire casting a golden glow across the familiar clutter of our lives. Holmes's chemical vials, my medical journals, and the violin resting on its stand. Mendez sat in the armchair, his diplomatic poise eroded by exhaustion and fear, his hands clasped tightly as he awaited Holmes's explanation. I, Dr. John Watson, sat with my notebook open, ready to record the culmination of our journey. Though my heart was heavy with the tragedy of the Countess's betrayal, Holmes stood by the hearth, his sharp features alive with the thrill of deduction. On the table before us lay the artifacts of the case. The fan, its ivory handle still smeared with blood. The rosary, its beads scattered save for the etched ebony one. The ciphered note, now decoded. And a sketch of the cloister, marked with the blood stain and scuff mark. He had pinned a diagram of the cathedral's quadrangle to the wall, its lines a map of the crime's unraveling. "Senor Mendez," Holmes began, his voice calm but commanding. "You brought this case to us, claiming the Countess's death threatened Portugal's alliances. Yet your own role in a secret society suggests deeper motives. Before we conclude, I shall lay out the truth of Countess Isabella de Almeida's murder, pieced together from the clues you provided and those we uncovered in Lisbon." Mendez's face paled, but he nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "Speak, Mr. Holmes. I would know the truth whatever it costs." Holmes gestured to the diagram. The Countess was found dead in the cathedral cloister, stabbed through the heart with a single, precise thrust. No weapon was found, but a fan marked JV, a broken rosary, and a ciphered note were left behind. These, combined with a scuff mark near the fountain, told a story of calculated betrayal. He picked up the fan bead with its etched cross. This bead, found among the scattered rosary, was the final clue. It matched a crucifix worn by Father Lorenzo, the Countess's confessor. She had given it to him as a token of trust, a gift that became his undoing. I leaned forward, my pen pausing. "Holmes, you mean the priest killed her? But why?" Holmes's gaze was steady, his voice measured. "Father Lorenzo was no mere cleric, Watson. He was a member of the secret society you, Senor Mendez, infiltrated. The Countess, privy to court secrets, uncovered their plot. A scheme to destabilize the monarchy through forged documents and whispered rebellions. She confided in Lorenzo, her trusted confessor, unaware of his allegiance. Fearing exposure, he acted. He pointed to the cloister diagram. The Countess went to the cloister for prayer, but also to meet JV, whom she believed was Villegas. Lorenzo, knowing her habits, arranged the rendezvous, using the society's code to lure her. He stabbed her with a knife, swiftly and precisely, and removed it to avoid detection. The rosary broke in her grasp, a detail he could not control, and the bead fell, unnoticed. Mendez's hands trembled. But the fan, why plant it? Holmes's smile was grim. To frame the Agas, whose courtship of the Countess was known. Lorenzo forged the initials J.V., knowing suspicion would fall on the suitor. The smuggler Diego's knife was another red herring, planted by the society to further muddy the waters. The cloaked stranger whom we pursued was a conspirator tasked with distracting us, but not the killer. I frowned, piecing it together. And the scuff mark? You said it matched Lorenzo's boots. Holmes nodded. The mark, near the fountain, bore the worn heel of Lorenzo's shoes, observed during our interview. His alibi, tending candles, was a lie. He was in the cloister, meeting the Countess, and his betrayal was swift. Mendez's voice broke. I suspected a plot, Mr. Holmes. Mendez's testimony will aid the crown. The Countess's death, though tragic, has exposed a threat to Portugal's stability. Mendez rose, his face etched with relief and sorrow. I owe you a debt, Mr. Holmes. The Countess deserved better, but her sacrifice will not be in vain. Holmes inclined his head. See that it is not, Senor. The truth is its own reward. As Mendez departed, the fire crackled, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of the case's resolution. I looked at Holmes, who stood gazing into the flames, his mind already drifting to the next challenge. A grim affair, Holmes, I said. The Countess trusted Lorenzo, and he betrayed her for a cause. Holmes's voice was soft, almost wistful. Trust, Watson, is a double-edged sword. It binds us, yet leaves us vulnerable. The Countess's faith was her strength and her downfall. We must guard our own with care. The rain began again, pattering against the windows of 221B, a familiar sound that anchored us to London's heartbeat. The mystery of the slain Countess was solved, but its echoes lingered, a reminder of the delicate balance between trust and truth in a world of shadows.